The White Bear Area Chamber of Commerce and On Location TV 19 are proud to present Your Business Matters, dedicated to your business needs. The White Bear Area Chamber is a nonprofit business organization serving as an advocate for the White Bear area and its business community. Now here is the Executive Director of the White Bear Area Chamber and the host of Your Business Matters, Tom Snell.
I want to welcome everybody to the White Bear Area Chamber of Commerce television program, Your Business Matters. And I'm really happy with the guest that we have today. It's Kathy Saltzman, who is the State Director for an organization called Students First. And Kathy, welcome to the White Bear Area Chamber of Commerce television program today.
Tom, it's great to be here today. Thank you for inviting me.
And the first question, Kathy, that I want to ask you is, what is Students First?
An excellent question to start off this time today. Students First is an organization that really focuses on transforming public education.
Okay.
And our founder and CEO is Michelle Rhee, who was the Chancellor of Washington, D.C. schools. And when she was there, she came in at a time appointed by the mayor and really looked at the schools and thought, we have to do better for kids.
And she was on the cover of Time magazine, right?
She was at the time, yes. And she came in and was very controversial in that she said, we need to put policies in place and do things that put the needs and interests of students first. So there were a lot of changes there. She instituted a teacher evaluation system. She really did a lot of staff changes. There were a lot of staffing changes, which were very controversial. She also negotiated a teacher contract that included evaluations and a very strong merit-based system. So the end result was that she left in 2010 at a time when she said, you know, why were these policies in place? I mean, it's so difficult to institute these really important reforms that we see today as having a tremendous impact on student achievement and growth in Washington, D.C. schools. So she started Students First, and I think our name says it's all. It's that we're about putting policies in place that puts students first.
I want to ask a real brief question about Michelle Rhee. Did she have any kind of background in education before she took over the top spot in the school district for Washington, D.C.?
Right. She was a member of Teach for America.
That's the program that was started by President Clinton, is that correct?
It was started no, that was AmeriCorps, but a lot of Teach for America members are part of AmeriCorps now. But I think that at the time it really was focused on really putting some of the highest performing college graduate in front of students who really had an attitude of, we will do whatever it takes so that children achieve. And that was really a very exciting model. It still is here in Minnesota today, and that we see a lot of TFA alums going on to do great things in education.
So she started from the trenches.
She started from the trenches, absolutely, in the classroom, and then went on to work with the New Teacher Project, which again was recruiting teachers to work in school districts where there was great need and great achievement gaps. So she did that, and then at that time, as she was becoming like a higher profile in terms of the work she was doing around education reform and the achievement gap, is that she was then asked to work with the Washington, D.C. schools, and that is where I think a lot of people really became much more aware of her.
Great. I'm going to ask a couple of questions about education reform now as it relates to Minnesota and to the Minnesota business community, because that's what the Chamber is all about. On the area of education reform, what are some things that Students first of all, would like to see happen in the Minnesota school districts?
I think what's important to note here is why we think reform is really important, Tom.
All right, let's start
from there. And so maybe talk a little bit about that, in that education is a knowledge-based economy, in that we see, in Minnesota, that the things where we are most successful is because we have a highly trained and skilled workforce. When we look to 2018, the Governor's Workforce Development Council has, looked at what are the needs of our state in terms of our workforce. We will rate at the top of the country. We'll be tied for first in the need for people in the workforce who have a post-secondary education. So that means that education is extremely important to our state in terms of having the people who are trained and able to do those jobs.
And are we moving in that direction?
Well, I think what's disturbing then is that we look at some of our graduation rates from high school and that we have dropped. We have some of the lowest graduation rates in the country for children of color. We are last in terms of children who have like Hispanic, Latino backgrounds, second to worst for students who come from the African American community. And that's really an issue not only of economic competitiveness, but also of just a social justice issue.
So we have a lot of work that we need to do with the achievement gap.
Right, and so we look at that. So that's from that respect. We also see proficiency scores that we have, we are way behind in that we absolutely have to make sure that our kids of color are achieving at, as well as white students. So we look at that and we say, what can we do differently? And so, Students First looks at it from a policy perspective. We've made some investments in all-day kindergarten, in early childhood opportunity scholarships, but what can we do in terms of policies? And we would say, what can we do to keep our greatest teachers in the classroom, the most effective teachers, in the classroom, to also, provide merit pay and recognize the teachers who are doing, incredible jobs with kids who need effective teachers.
Now, I want to get into the business issue in just a second, but the other thing I want to mention, you just said something about keeping the best teachers in the classroom. What happens if you have a really good teacher that comes out of college, is doing a phenomenal job, but they don't have what's called teacher tenure? They haven't been there long enough to have their job protected. And then layoffs come. Aren't they the ones that end up getting laid off from the teaching profession? And if that's the case, isn't that a disincentive for some people to actually go into teaching?
Tom, you've really articulated an issue that we think is really important and needs to be reviewed here in our state, because we have laws and policies that we would say are outdated. They were there for a reason at one point, but in Minnesota right now we have what's called last in, first out. And what that means is that the last person in is then the first person to be let go in case there are staffing changes or layoffs. And so we would say that in state law to have a policy that says school districts need to lay off in the inverse order of when they were hired is really dated, and it's not allowing school districts the flexibility they need to keep the most effective teachers in the classroom. And that's not only an issue for school leaders, but for parents. I think that if you ask parents, who is the teacher that you want for your child? Is it the most senior teacher or the most effective teacher? And parents are going to say the most effective teacher. And I think many of us who have had kids in school have seen that happen. Where why is Mr. Smith leaving? Well, he doesn't have he hasn't been here the longest. Whereas you want the best teacher.
Okay.
So we would say that we should change that law so that districts have greater flexibility in how they staff their buildings.
Okay. In getting to the business community, because that's one of the things I wanted to bring up, why are these issues so important to business? You mentioned the achievement gap, some of the teaching issues that need to be updated. What is in it for the business community?
Well, I think when you talk to our businesses, they want to be competitive in a very global economy, and that means having the most highly skilled people in the world. And I think that last year in our legislative session, there was a bill passed. It was called the World's Greatest Workforce, and really was focused on what do we need to do in our state to close the achievement gap so that we have a very competitive workforce. And that means having those skills. So when we see our students and seeing these achievement gaps, and also seeing for children who really are coming from communities and coming from situations that are really struggling, education is key to their success. I think last week Sue Haig, who is with our Metropolitan Council, she had commented on, we also have some of the largest gaps in the country, disparity gaps in terms of poverty, in terms of income, in terms of our housing. And so what can we do to address that? And education is absolutely key. We know we have to address poverty. We know we have to address homelessness and hunger. Those are things, but at the same time, we have to have very high expectations for all children. And that's where I think where we see some teachers who have that ability, who have that, I will do whatever it takes, to make sure that these kids achieve and are effective. We have to make sure that those teachers are in our classrooms with these students.
And then for business, because we do have this world economy now, and we've got companies that have equity stakes for foreign countries, they're going to expect to have a highly trained workforce, and that means the achievement gap needs to close, and we need to have students that are coming out of high school and post-secondary schools that can go in and be effective in bringing our job force forward.
Absolutely, Tom. And I think so. We look at this from many different angles. It's a workforce issue. It's also a social justice issue that we absolutely cannot accept.
Okay. Minnesota schools. Let's focus a little bit on that. What are some of the reforms that we can talk about with Minnesota? Now, we talked about achievement gap. Are there any other real specific things that you would like to see happen in the Minnesota school districts that can help bring more accountability?
I think we've talked about, the teacher quality and effectiveness. And so keeping that teacher evaluation system in place is very important. It's important not only because it helps us to identify the great teachers, but help in, professional development to make sure that a teacher who is rated, effective becomes a highly effective teacher. A teacher who is new and needs development has that support. So it's all about, professional development as well. I think we also want to look at choice for parents, that it's very important that parents have, choices. Within a school district, you see choices sometimes between magnet schools and, more, established schools. It also, has to do with having a very strong choice program, and our charter school system, in Minnesota was one of the first in the country. We have really strong policies in place, but we absolutely have to do better in that we have some highly effective charter schools who are getting results with students. We have some charter schools that are really low in terms of student performance, and we have to address that. We give charter schools great flexibility, but we need to hold them accountable.
And then charter schools are public schools.
Charter schools are public schools, and so we should hold them accountable. And so one of the things that we worked on last session was really making sure that we have a process in place to make sure that the high performing charters are able to replicate. Parents have that choice. At the same time, if they're not performing, we should probably have a stronger closure provision. Because some people think that going to a charter school is going to be a better school, and that is not always the case.
Now, on school districts that we have, are there things that individual parents can do to help improve their schools, make them more accountable to the needs of the students, and also prepare for future education opportunities?
Parents are absolutely key to their children's success, and it's very important that we always look at ways to engage parents, empower parents. And so giving parents information is really, really important. I think that sometimes we hear, from parents, I didn't know I could ask that question. We have parents of color who sometimes do not feel welcome in our schools. So how can we reach out to them? The other piece I think that is really important, like with parents, is having information about their children. There has been a lot of discussion about testing, and sometimes people refer to testing as we're over-testing our kids. At the same time, I know that parents always also say, I want to know how my child is doing. Are they proficient? Are they at grade level? So making sure that districts are providing parents with both, a how their child is doing, but also how is their school doing. So we talk about, a school report card, so that we can also evaluate our schools and how well they are doing in educating
That's
students.
a good idea. And would you elaborate on that a little bit when you call when you say school report card? What would that entail?
Right. We think that the state collects a lot of information about schools, and so as we talk about choice and talk about where a parent might feel like this is the best school for my child, to be able to look at that. I know the state is working on that. I've heard that they'll be having something on their website in the next couple of weeks, but we would say that it really should talk about proficiency, should talk about how are they closing the achievement gap, and that's really good information to have, but having it so that it's accessible and easy to understand. That's why we talk about an A to F report card, because a parent knows what that means. If you talk about labeling schools a different way, it's not always very clear to parents.
I want to briefly get back to the achievement gap issue. If you're in a school district with predominantly a white, Caucasian student body, why is the achievement gap important to that school or to those parents and the administration?
Well, I think first of all, we can look at that achievement gap not only from within a school, but how are we competing on a global basis?
Okay.
And so when you look at some of those scores that have come out on the international tests, Minnesota has done well in the United States, but when you compete against other countries, we aren't looking as well as we should. I think Arnie Duncan has talked about that, to say for the United States to compete. So being first in the United States isn't good enough anymore. And again, our kids of color are not doing as well. Our white kids are doing extremely well in some cases in terms of the United States, but in terms of an international basis. In terms of a suburban parent asking why is this achievement gap important to me, I think you look at it again from how are we going to compete as a state and as a country, and that we absolutely have to look at this from an economic competitiveness issue as well as a social justice issue.
Absolutely.
And that these kids are our future. It's where we are growing our population, and it's absolutely wrong to say that we can educate some kids and then we can't educate others. That's absolutely wrong.
Now, how about people that want to go into the teaching profession? Maybe they've been a chemist somewhere all their working life, and they want to go into the teaching profession, but they don't have the time to go up to St. Cloud State University to take a class, take one of the primary classes that they need to have in order to get licensed. Do you think there needs to be any reforms in licensure requirements?
There's been some reforms. There has been some important policies passed in terms of alternative certification, and that's a really good step for Minnesota. I think the other thing we have to discuss is that with young teachers, when they see the seniority laws, when they see that you're paid based on the number of years you teach, instead of your effectiveness, I think that's really it is frustrating to them. So I think what can we do to really elevate the teaching profession? And that means really treating teachers as real, as important members of solving all the issues that we have with the achievement gap, and really identifying the teachers who are having an impact, and making sure that they are also paid well. We think that highly effective teachers should be paid well, and that's why we have this alternative compensation plan in place in Minnesota. We should really grow that, really link our teacher evaluations and our compensation.
Okay. Now, before we close here, too, I want to make sure if parents or people are interested in being part of the Students First program, what do they need to do if somebody's hearing this and they say, this is really interesting to me?
Well, we are approaching a legislative session, and as we talk about, we change our policies. So that's really a very important step in this process. And so Students First will have a presence at the Capitol. We are working on, again, really keeping our best teachers in the classroom, focus on those kind of policies around, outdated policies that have to be changed. And
Are
they
there-
can contact
Yep.
us at studentsfirst.org.
Okay.
That's a good place to start. You can sign up, give us your name and email address, and we'll get in contact with you. We have
Wonderful.
a number of different events coming up as well.
Great. And I understand that Michelle Rhee is going to be in the state.
She will be. She will be here for a chamber event on Thursday, February 6th. I believe that they plan to tape that event, and so hopefully if people miss it, they'll be able to hear her and also all the other great speakers who are coming for a day to
Okay,
talk about
all right.
an urgency, in
And
closing our
then
achievement gap.
Obviously, she was the founder of Students First.
Yes, she is.
Okay, well, Kathy Saltzman, it was wonderful to have you on our program today. And again, I would encourage people to look at Students First as a real opportunity to find ways that we can improve our public education system in Minnesota.
Well, Tom, thank you.
Thank you very
so
much for joining us.
Absolutely.
You've been watching Your Business Matters. For more information on this program or the White Bear Area Chamber, visit www.whitebearchamber.com or call 651-429-8593.